When we think of vitamin C, we think of oranges. This association is so deeply embedded that it barely requires thought. Orange juice at breakfast. Vitamin C supplements derived from citrus. The entire infrastructure of immune support built around a single fruit that requires irrigation, temperate climates, careful handling, and refrigeration to reach consumers before it degrades. Vitamin C is unstable. It breaks down with heat, with light, with time. By the time an orange travels from orchard to shelf to kitchen, a significant portion of its vitamin C has already diminished. This is the trade-off we accept. This is the system we have built. And yet, across the African continent, there is a tree that produces a fruit containing 6 to 10 times more vitamin C than oranges. The fruit does not rot. It does not require refrigeration. It dries naturally inside its own shell, preserving its nutrients for years without processing, without additives, without intervention. The tree is called the Baobab. It has been feeding human populations for thousands of years. It produces fruit during droughts, when other crops fail. A single tree can yield hundreds of kilograms of food annually and continue producing for 1,000 years or more. The fruit pulp is approximately 50% prebiotic fiber, higher than almost any other whole food measured. The antioxidant content rivals or exceeds fruits marketed specifically for that purpose. The fruit dries itself. It stores itself. It survives conditions that would destroy any commercial orchard. The question is not whether this tree produces exceptional nutrition. The evidence is extensive. The traditional use is documented across dozens of cultures spanning millennia. The question is why a fruit this nutrient-dense, this shelf-stable, this drought-resistant, remains virtually unknown in the countries that spend billions annually on vitamin C supplements and probiotic products. The tree is ancient in ways that challenge comprehension. Specimens still standing today were already mature when the pyramids were under construction. Carbon dating of the oldest known individuals suggests lifespans exceeding 2,000 years. These are not mere plants. They are monuments, living archives of climate, drought, and human dependence. The genus originated in Madagascar, though the timeline remains debated. What is certain is that one species crossed to mainland Africa millions of years ago and established itself across the savanna belt, from Senegal in the west to Sudan in the east, from the Sahel to South Africa. The trees became landmarks. They became meeting places. They became, in the most literal sense, the center of communities. The San peoples of southern Africa, among the oldest continuous cultures on Earth, incorporated this tree into their survival strategies long before recorded history. The fruit provided sustenance during the dry season, when other food sources vanished. The leaves were eaten as vegetables. The seeds were roasted and ground. The bark was stripped for fiber without killing the tree, which healed itself and continued producing. This was not marginal nutrition. This was infrastructure. Across West Africa, the pattern repeated. In Mali, in Burkina Faso, in Senegal, communities oriented themselves around these trees. The Dogon people considered them sacred. Griots, the oral historians and musicians who carried cultural memory across generations, performed beneath their canopies. The trees marked territory, resolved disputes, witnessed ceremonies. They were geography, calendar, and pharmacy in one. When Arab traders crossed the Sahara in the medieval period, they documented what they found. The accounts describe massive trees, wider than they were tall, producing a fruit that the local population stored and consumed throughout the year. The traders noted the fruit's astringent quality, slightly tart, chalky, unusual in texture. They noted that it kept indefinitely. European explorers arriving on the African coast in the 15th and 16th centuries recorded similar observations. The trees were unmistakable, enormous, grotesque to European eyes, with swollen trunks that looked inverted, as if the roots had been turned toward the sky. Some believed the trees grew upside down. The mythology was easier to accept than the reality. A single organism, producing food for centuries, requiring nothing but rainfall that might not arrive for years. The fruit functioned as famine insurance. When rains failed, and in the Sahel they failed regularly, crops withered. Livestock died. The annual grasses that normally provided grazing disappeared. But the trees endured. Their root systems reached deep into water tables inaccessible to surface plants. Their trunks stored water through the mechanism that gave them their swollen appearance. And they fruited regardless, producing the hard-shelled pods that contained the powdery, nutrient-dense pulp. This pulp was mixed with water to create a drink. It was stirred into porridge. It was fed to children and nursing mothers. It was given to the sick. The applications were consistent across cultures that had no contact with one another. The same fruit, the same preparations, the same understanding that this substance provided something essential. The tree was not merely food, it was pharmacy. Traditional healers used the fruit for fever, for digestive complaints, for what we might now call inflammation. The bark was prepared as treatments for malaria. The leaves were applied to wounds. The seeds produced an oil used for skin conditions. Every part of the tree entered the pharmacopoeia, not as mystical remedies, but as practical interventions refined over generations of observation. Missionaries and colonial administrators in the 19th century documented these uses with a mixture of curiosity and condescension. They recorded the practices. They described the trees as objects of primitive veneration. They introduced European crops, maize, wheat, cash crops for export, and redirected labor toward the new agricultural system. The trees were not cut down in large numbers. They were simply bypassed. The new economy valued different outputs. The new agriculture measured success by different metrics. A tree that took decades to mature, that could not be replanted on schedule, that produced food on its own timeline rather than the market's, this did not fit the model. The knowledge persisted in the communities that had always held it. Grandmothers continued preparing the fruit as they always had. Children continued climbing the trees to harvest pods. The relationship was unbroken, but the tree never entered the global food system. It remained local, invisible to the industrial infrastructure being built around commodity crops. The world learned about oranges. The world never learned about the tree that outperformed them. The tree did not fail. The system could not accommodate it. The first obstacle was time. Commercial agriculture operates on cycles measured in months. Annual crops are planted, grown, harvested, and replanted. The infrastructure, from seed financing to harvest equipment to processing facilities, assumes this rhythm. Investment capital expects returns within years, not decades. This tree operates on a different scale. A seedling planted today may not produce meaningful fruit for 15 to 20 years. Full maturity takes longer. The tree is an investment that spans generations, not quarterly reports. No commercial agricultural operation builds around assets that won't produce until the founders are retired or dead. This temporal mismatch was decisive. The same quality that made the tree invaluable to traditional societies, its longevity, its multi-generational productivity, made it invisible to industrial agriculture. The second obstacle was structure. The tree cannot be monocropped. It does not grow in neat rows. It does not respond to the intensive cultivation methods that transformed wheat, corn, rice, and soy into global commodities. Commercial orchards require standardization, uniform spacing, predictable yields, mechanical harvesting. This tree defies standardization. Each specimen is individual. Each grows according to its own logic, shaped by soil and rainfall and the centuries it has already lived. Harvesting is manual. The pods grow high in the canopy. They must be collected by hand, often by climbers who ascend the massive trunks using traditional techniques. This labor cannot be mechanized. It cannot be scaled in the ways that industrial food production demands. The third obstacle was processing. While the fruit dries naturally, extracting the pulp from the pods requires work. The shells are hard. The pulp is mixed with seeds and fibers that must be separated. Traditional processing methods, developed over centuries, accomplish this efficiently at small scales. But no factories were built, no supply chains were established, no standardized processing infrastructure exists. Compare this to the orange. Citrus cultivation spread globally because colonial powers invested in plantations. Processing facilities were built to extract juice. Refrigerated shipping was developed to move fresh fruit. Marketing campaigns, most famously by early citrus cooperatives, established the association between oranges and health. The infrastructure created the demand, and the demand justified more infrastructure. No equivalent investment was made for the African tree. No colonial power had interest in developing a fruit that local populations already harvested for themselves. The fruit could not be monopolized. It could not be patented. It grew wild. Anyone could harvest it. There was no mechanism for profit extraction, no competitive advantage to be gained. The fourth obstacle was perception. Colonial frameworks classified African foods as primitive, the sustenance of people who had not yet advanced to proper agriculture. The fact that this tree provided superior nutrition was irrelevant. What mattered was what it represented: the old way, the traditional way, the way that colonizers intended to replace. This perception outlasted colonialism itself. When newly independent African nations sought to modernize, they often adopted the agricultural models they had inherited: cash crops for export, industrial methods, reliance on global commodity markets. The trees remained in the landscape, but they remained outside the official economy. The fruit was subsistence, not commerce. It was what villagers ate, not what nations exported. The tree entered the 21st century in the same position it had occupied for generations, essential to millions of people, invisible to global markets. The European Union approved the fruit as a novel food ingredient in 2008. This regulatory milestone allowed the dried pulp to be legally sold in European countries. Small companies began importing the powder, marketing it to health-conscious consumers seeking superfoods, gut health, and clean label ingredients. But the structural barriers remain. The tree still cannot be farmed in the industrial sense. The harvest still depends on manual labor. The supply chains remain fragmented. The processing still happens largely at the village level, with quality varying accordingly. The result is a specialty product. The powder appears in health food stores, in smoothie supplements, in niche products priced far above commodity ingredients. It has not entered the mainstream. It has not replaced orange juice on breakfast tables. It has not become what its nutritional profile suggests it could be. The tree continues producing, as it has always produced. The fruit continues drying in its shells, as it has for millennia. The nutrients remain what they always were. The obstacle was never biology. The obstacle was economics, and economics built for a different kind of crop. The nutritional analysis, when Western laboratories finally conducted it, documented what African communities had understood for generations. The vitamin C content is exceptional. Measurements consistently show concentrations 6 to 10 times higher than orange juice. This is not marginal superiority. It is categorical difference. A tablespoon of the dried pulp contains more vitamin C than an entire orange, but the more remarkable finding is stability. Vitamin C typically degrades rapidly. Heat destroys it. Light degrades it. Time diminishes it. This is why fresh squeezed orange juice loses potency within hours. This is why commercial juice requires processing that further reduces vitamin content. This is why supplements use stabilized synthetic forms. The fruit pulp from this tree dries naturally inside its shell, protected from light and moisture. The pod hangs on the tree or falls to the ground, and the pulp dehydrates slowly in the African sun. When researchers tested pulp that had been stored for months or years, the vitamin C remained largely intact. This combination, high concentration plus natural stability, is biochemically unusual. It suggests the presence of compounds that protect the vitamin C from oxidation. The antioxidants in the pulp appear to preserve each other, creating a matrix more stable than any of its individual components. The antioxidant profile is substantial. The pulp contains polyphenols at concentrations comparable to or exceeding berries marketed specifically for antioxidant content. ORAC measurements, a standardized assessment of antioxidant capacity, place this fruit among the highest-scoring natural foods tested. The compounds include flavonoids and phenolic acids associated in research with reduced inflammation and oxidative stress. But the most significant component may be the fiber. Approximately half of the dried pulp consists of soluble fiber. This is an extraordinary proportion. Most fruits contain far less. This fiber functions as a prebiotic, a substrate that feeds beneficial bacteria in the human gut. The mechanism is well understood. Soluble fiber reaches the large intestine largely undigested. There, it becomes food for bacterial species associated with gut health, Bifidobacteria, Lactobacillus, and others. These bacteria ferment the fiber, producing short-chain fatty acids that nourish the intestinal lining and support immune function. The concentration in this fruit means that even small amounts deliver substantial prebiotic activity. Studies examining the effect of the pulp on gut microbiome composition have shown measurable shifts toward beneficial bacterial populations. The glycemic response is also notable. When researchers tested blood sugar response to meals containing the pulp, they found significant blunting of glucose spikes. The combination of fiber and polyphenols slows carbohydrate absorption. For populations managing blood sugar, and the number is growing globally, this profile is relevant. The mineral content rounds out the nutritional picture. The pulp contains meaningful amounts of calcium, unusual for a fruit. Potassium levels are substantial. Magnesium and iron are present in quantities that would contribute to daily requirements if consumed regularly. All of this comes in a form that requires no processing beyond cracking open the shell. No cooking, no extraction, no industrial transformation. The tree produces the fruit. The sun dries it. The shell preserves it. The nutrition is simply there. The tree's drought resistance adds another dimension to its significance. Climate projections suggest increasing aridity across much of sub-Saharan Africa. Rainfall patterns are becoming less predictable. Growing seasons are shifting. Crops that depend on consistent moisture are becoming riskier. This tree thrives in precisely these conditions. Its deep root system accesses water unavailable to annual crops. Its ability to store water in its trunk allows it to survive dry seasons that would kill other species. It continues producing fruit when maize withers and millet fails. In a warming world with increasing food insecurity, a tree that produces reliable nutrition under drought conditions is not merely interesting. It is strategic. Some researchers have begun calling it climate-resilient food infrastructure. The framing is accurate. These are not crops that can be planted and harvested in a single season. They are living systems that, once established, provide food security for centuries. One tree can produce for 1,000 years. One tree can feed a community through multiple droughts. One tree can be the difference between survival and starvation when the rains do not come. The tree is still there, across the African savanna, offering what it has always offered. The question is whether the systems that distribute food globally can find a way to incorporate it. The tree is called the Baobab. It grows across the African continent, from Senegal to Sudan, from Mali to Mozambique. It grows in Madagascar, where multiple species evolved in isolation. It grows in Australia, where a single species crossed at some point in the distant past. The distribution spans 2 hemispheres, multiple climates, and countless human cultures that have depended on it. The trees are unmistakable. They stand alone on the savanna, their trunks swollen to diameters that can exceed 30 feet. The branches spread horizontally, sparse and reaching, resembling roots more than crowns. The appearance led to the legend that the tree grows upside down. that God, angered by the tree's vanity, ripped it from the ground and replanted it with its roots in the air. The legend captures something true. The tree does not look like other trees. It looks like something that should not exist, too wide, too bare, too ancient. And yet it persists, producing fruit year after year, century after century, while faster-growing species rise and fall around it. The fruit pods hang from the branches on long stems. They are oblong, covered in velvety green fuzz that turns brown as they mature. The shells harden to a woody texture. Inside, the pulp surrounds dark seeds, chalky and pale, waiting to be harvested. In the villages where tradition persists, the harvest continues as it always has. Children climb the trunks using ropes or carved footholds. Pods are knocked loose with long sticks. The fruit is gathered, cracked, and processed, the pulp separated, the seeds set aside for oil or roasting. The pulp is mixed with water to make a tart, refreshing drink. It is stirred into porridge. It is given to children, to the elderly, to anyone who needs its nourishment. The knowledge passes from generation to generation, unbroken. In cities, the powder now appears in health food stores. It is marketed as a superfruit, a gut health product, a clean label ingredient. The packaging shows stylized trees and African landscapes. The price is high, a reflection of the manual labor required to harvest and process, the fragmented supply chains, the niche market positioning. For those who wish to use it, the application is simple. The powder dissolves easily in water, smoothies, or yogurt. It has a tart, slightly tangy flavor, often compared to citrus with notes of caramel. A tablespoon provides meaningful nutrition. It requires no preparation beyond mixing. Growing the tree outside its native range is possible but challenging. The seeds germinate readily. The seedlings grow slowly. The tree requires warmth and tolerates drought, but it will not survive frost. It demands patience measured in decades, not seasons. Some have begun planting. In community projects across Africa, new trees are established alongside the ancient ones. The work is long-term. The planters know they may not live to see their trees bear fruit. They plant anyway for the generations that will follow. The ancient trees remain. They stand where they have stood for centuries, witnesses to everything that has changed around them. The rise and fall of kingdoms, the arrival and departure of colonizers, the droughts and famines and recoveries. The fruit still dries in its shell. The nutrients remain stable. The powder that African grandmothers have prepared for millennia now travels to kitchens on other continents, carrying the same compounds, offering the same nourishment. The tree asks nothing. It produces regardless of attention, regardless of market demand, regardless of whether anyone beyond its shade understands what it offers. It simply continues, as it has for 2,000 years. The knowledge was never lost. It was held carefully by the communities who never stopped relying on it. Now, slowly, it begins to travel, carried not by colonial ships or industrial supply chains, but by small producers, researchers, and consumers seeking something the modern food system cannot easily provide. The tree is still there. It is still bearing fruit. And it will still be there, long after the systems that overlooked it have been replaced by whatever comes next.